Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's February 22, 2023, and this is episode 806. We pick up the trail today on the afternoon of our first day in Hokkaido, when we took a break from shooting the beautiful and elegant red-crowned cranes and went to photograph a Ural owl on its nest. This nest is quite far from the path from which we photograph it, in an attempt to prevent people from disturbing the owl too much. We have heard reports of people throwing things at owls' nests to wake them up, which I find mind-boggling, but some people have little to no respect for the wildlife that they care about enough to photograph. I think the long and short of it is that some people are simply collecting trophies, and probably not a far cry from the hunters that would have killed an animal in Africa and hung its head over their fireplace. As a result of the distance, I photographed this owl with a focal length of 1000 millimeters, a combination of my 100 to 500 millimeter lens at its full extent and my RF 2.0 times extender. The limitation of the Canon RF extenders that prevents you from zooming out proved much more troublesome on this trip than in Namibia last summer. The wildlife in Namibia was always a reasonable distance away, so there wasn't much need to zoom out. But when photographing the cranes and swans in Hokkaido, I tried to zoom out past the limited focal length many times. I hope that Canon comes up with a better solution before too long. After photographing the owl, we went to a location where we would photograph the cranes flying away with a slow shutter speed for a panning shot. I generally use a 50th of a second, which results in the look of the second image for today, but this is a panning shot with a twist. The cranes flew away through a gap in the trees, and I kept firing as this one became obscured by the foreground tree. Although I was initially disappointed that I'd continued to shoot, I realized that I liked the results. It almost looks to me like the crane is just starting to reach warp speed, as the Starship Enterprise does in Star Trek. I see from my settings that I was down to a 1/30th of a second for this particular shot, with my ISO set to 100 and an aperture of f13, so you can tell that the light was starting to die a little at the end of the day. I don't call out my settings for every photograph, but note that if you click on any of the images on the blog at martinbaileyphotography.com or for this post at mbp.ac/806, the light box that opens displays the EXIF data for the image below each image when available, so you can check for yourself when interested in this information. The following morning we headed out to Otowabashi, or the Ottawa Bridge, where Ottawa means the sound of wings, which I love, and we were treated to some lovely hoarfrost on the trees and mist on the river. Just like the snow monkeys, the number of photographers on the bridge is back to lunatic proportions, but we don't try to compete with the 4 a.m. crowd, as this results in forcing our bus driver to drive illegally long days, and we stay within the boundaries of the law on my tours. We leave early enough to form a second row and shoot between the shoulders of the folks that get there before us. The cranes are gradually moving further down the river too, so I shot this image at 1000 millimeters once again with my 100 to 500 millimeter lens and the 2 times extender. The mist was almost too thick, but I love the look, almost like an ink painting. and if you look into the crowd of cranes, you will perhaps be able to make out the silhouette of two deer that walked through the cranes as they tried to warm up and start their day, which caused the cranes and ducks to fly. In this next image, you'll see that I captured the aftermath of the deer's little stroll, resulting in what I think is a pretty beautiful scene. The deer are still faintly visible in the mist, probably wondering if they smell as the birds took flight. Because the weight distribution of the 100 to 500mm lens changes as you zoom, I found it very difficult to use on my old Really Right Stuff gimbal head, so I would routinely take the camera off the tripod whenever any action started. After the previous frame, I reached for the quick release and shot the next image handheld as the cranes quite humorously left the area in pairs, almost as though they'd been talked down the runway by traffic controllers. Later that day, we went back to the crane center, and I was happy to be able to capture this next image of two cranes calling together, with their breath showing due to the light coming from the sun just above the trees directly behind the cranes. It was slightly hazy when I shot this, so the light and the shadow of the birds' necks on their bodies was not as harsh as the two images of single cranes that I shared at the end of the previous episode, part 1 of this series. A little further along from where I shot the previous image, there is a slightly raised area that enables us to look down on the cranes that fly out of the reserve just above the snow, and that provides an opportunity to get shots that are predominantly white on white, and I love this type of image. I like it when you have to work to see and understand the contents of an image, and when the outline of the birds is difficult to see, the image falls into this category. The following day we moved on to start our 2 days close to Lake Kusharo. We were here mainly to photograph the whooper swans, but in recent years I've become somewhat obsessed with trying to photograph the incredibly cute long-tailed tits that we see in this area. I didn't get a shot that I was happy to share, but while looking out for small birds, I did get this shot of a Japanese pygmy woodpecker, which I thought was quite cute. For such small birds that move around very quickly, I had set my shutter speed to a 3200th of a second, and my ISO also needed to be at 3200 with an aperture of f8 to reach the optimal exposure. Note too that I increased the whiteness of the background in this shot on my computer to make it pure white. The light grey in the original image looked a little disturbing with traces of other branches in the bokeh, so I figured it would probably work better, just pure white. Just as we'd been lucky to get some snow shortly before visiting the snow monkeys, Lake Kusharo only froze a few days before we arrived, and then a warm day caused the ice to break up, and then it froze again, causing the fissures that you can see in the background of this next image. I don't dislike them, especially with the evening sun reflecting in the water like this. After the swans comes our 3 days photographing the sea eagles from the small fishing town of Daosu. Although all locations provide spectacular winter wildlife photography opportunities, the sea eagles in some ways are the highlight of the trip. As I mentioned in the previous episode, we often have to increase the ISO to reach our optimal exposure, but exposing to the right so that the data on the histogram is just short of the right shoulder ensures that you don't see grain in your image. I shot this at ISO 3200 with a shutter speed of 1,000th of a second at f10. I like that reflection of the Stellar's Sea Eagle that's captured so strongly in the water beneath the bird. I enjoyed the faster frame rate of the EOS R5, and the autofocus is also amazing. The Sea Eagles were going to be my final test of the R5 for wildlife, because photographing these birds swooping down and catching fish from the sea is one of the most difficult subjects I shoot. But as you can see, and will see for most of the images that I'll share in part 3 of this series, the R5 did a great job. We'll wrap it up there for today though, and I'm going to be in Hokkaido for the third and final Japan winter tour of this season when I release this podcast. I will release part 3 at the start of March before going on to walk you through our experiences in the final tour. If you're interested in joining one of these tours in 2024 or a future year, you can check availability and tour details and book your place, all linked from our tours page at mbp.ac/tours. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting us on Patreon, which comes with various tiers of benefits depending on your contribution. For details, check out our Patreon page at mbp.ac/Patreon. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back at the beginning of March with another episode. In the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye bye.